Thank you so much, and you gave me. If I can grab everyone's attention. Hello, hello. Many of you, but not all of you, are here for our Contemporary Issues Committee presentation by our beloved and renowned Sherry Wander. And if you're staying for that, great. If not, you can feel free to still get your coffee and cookies. And as you're here, you can still get up and go get those things as we share. I'm amused because I asked Sherry for a bio, and Sherry's like one of the most humble people ever. But talk about mustard seed stories. She's created a vision and just lived into it. The world is not as we hope it will be, and she's somebody who lives as if it's already the ideal way that we want it to be. And her values, her fierce, hard-nosed hope is what you all often say. This is the person that through that pastoral discretionary fund, if there's somebody that she knows that she's already vouched for to say, hey, this person's going to fall through the cracks, she can reach out to me, and she can reach out to our other colleagues that she's formed relationships with at First Baptist, and we've done incredible things through relationships that she's built in the community and with clergy. She is the organizer at Peace House in Ypsi. And she is the longtime coordinator of our daytime warming shelter here in Washtenaw County. She works in the tradition of the Catholic worker movement, which I promised her we would not know a ton about as Congregationalists. So she'll tell us a little bit more about that. If you haven't got to meet her before, you're in for a treat today. Sherry's just going to tell us stories and vision of how we are meeting the needs of our neighbors and loving our neighbors here in Ann Arbor and Ypsi. Sherry.
Hi, thanks, friends. It's good to be here in this space. You all have been an amazing partner with the Daytime Warming Center, which is my baby and my passion. I am completely time blind, and I am very passionate about this stuff. So I'm going to ask for your help. I'm going to ask for someone to wave at me at 11:40, because that will tell me to shut up. The other thing I'm going to ask is don't let me talk at you that entire time. If you have questions, raise your hand. I'll hand you the microphone. If I'm ignoring you, just shout, and I will hand you the microphone as much as possible. I would love for this to be not just my voice, but all of our voice. So I want to start just sharing some stats with you. Before I even begin to talk about where the mustard seeds were thrown in my life. There is a thing called the point in time count that is basically an annual census of people experiencing homelessness. At this point in time, on a day in January every year, there are X number of people experiencing homelessness, and this is done all over the country on the same day. In Michigan, the numbers are probably not super accurate. They're probably much less than they actually are, because January in Michigan, people will do anything they can to get their friends, their relatives, their loved ones, strangers inside, and then they don't get counted. But it's the best we have for now. According to the 2024 point in time count, there were 771,480 people experiencing homelessness in the United States on that day in January. 771,480. That number was up 18% from the previous year and was the biggest jump ever since they began doing the point in time count. That was before the current administration and the changes in policy, and so we know that number is going to increase. Significantly, no county in the entire country had enough permanent supportive housing to begin to make a dent in that number. The system was only able to house 16%, 16% of those who needed it. So that is really discouraging. And so I want to lean into hope. And that can be really hard, but I think that hope is often thought of as this like soft and gentle thing. And I think of hope as being fierce and tough and determined. It's like the snow tires. And so the stories I want to share today are stories that have given me hope. But with that sort of background, and any questions or thoughts on those numbers before we move forward? Where are the others? That is a good question. That is a good question. And we have some answers, but not all. So before we continue, I want to share a little bit how I got involved in this. About a dozen years ago, there was I lied, more like 20 years ago now. Man, I'm old, y'all. About 20 years ago, there was a tent community, Camp Take Notice. Some of you are nodding. That makes me smile, gives me hope. It existed in many locations, but ended up on a little triangle of land between 23 and 14 and Wagner Road, owned by MDOT. Camp Take Notice, as often is the case, was getting swept. For those who aren't familiar with that term, it means that it was getting evicted. People were told, you can no longer camp here. You have to get shelter. But at that time, Delonis was a high barrier shelter, and not all those folks were able to be there. And so they had nowhere to go. And so people wanted to protest. They wanted to resist that eviction. And one of my other hats that I wear is as a nonviolence trainer. So I was called in to do some nonviolence training so that people who were choosing to resist eviction, both those who were camped there and many from the faith community who wanted to be in solidarity with them, would, if they got arrested, it would be for exactly what they wanted to get arrested for. And there could be no, stories spun about violence. And I thought, I'm going to go, I'm going to do this training, I'm going to hang out, do a solidarity action or two, and then I'm going to go back to my life. And God laughed at that, and my life changed. The seed was planted. And so I got to know another woman who was involved, Peggy Lynch, and we opened up Mercy House. Mercy House, like Peace House where I live now, is a house of hospitality in the tradition of the Catholic worker movement. Just like, by show of hands or touching your nose or wiggling, who's familiar with the Catholic worker movement? Okay. Dorothy Day. Anyone familiar with Dorothy Day? Okay. So the joke among Catholic workers is small c, capital W. Many of us are no longer Catholic or never were. All of us are workers in some way or another. Dorothy Day opened her home during the Depression. She looked around and she said, I see all these soup kitchens and shelters that are serving the deserving poor. And as I understand the gospel, it is not my job to decide who is deserving. It is my job to love people and to make a world where it is easier for people to be good. Dorothy was a bit of an anarchist, which I love. And so she said, we don't need some centralized movement. What we need is people all across the country to open their homes and provide hospitality to people who are experiencing poverty and homelessness. And that's going to look different in every community. It's going to look different in every home, because you should provide hospitality in a way that is meaningful to you as well as meaningful to your community. So all across the country, there are these houses, and what they have in common is two things. They provide hospitality. Who the heck knows what that means? For some, it means overnight shelter. For some, it means a meal. For some, it means showers. For some, it means daily prayer time. Some version of hospitality. And they connect the need for that to what our government is currently choosing to spend its money on. And so there is also a component that is active, that says it is not enough to bandage the wounds that occur because of capitalism and racism and poverty. We also need to confront those systems and dismantle them so that we really can be together in the kingdom. And so we started Mercy House with that in mind, and eventually I moved out of Mercy House, and it was not this direct of a path, but ended up at Peace House, a Catholic worker house in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where I'm still living. So Peace House, we had been doing overnights, but due to some family health issues are no longer doing overnights. But we invite people in to shower. We invite people who are experiencing homelessness in to shower, to do laundry. Thanks to this congregation, we have a washing machine. And we invite people into a free store that is in our basement, a free store that has clothing and camping equipment. But really what we try to do is create mutual aid projects that then can take on a life of their own and that we can get out of the way. So we started something called Pet Pals Mutual Aid. I have a very spicy dog. If I were homeless again, I could not give up my dog. She gives my life balance and joy and is family, and I would live in a tent in this weather before I gave up my dog. And I know lots of other people in that space, because there's no shelter in Washtenaw County where you can bring your pets. So we started Pet Pals. We have a cupboard on the side of my house that we keep stocked with pet food. People can access it 24/7. And we try to get medication and leashes. We try to get people vouchers to get their pets spayed or neutered or licensed if they need that. We try to raise money so that when it is, -4 and snowing, people can get into a hotel with their pet, or if they have emergency vet care. I know that if I were eaten by a dinosaur today, Pet Pals would continue. It makes me just giddy with the thought of it. We also started a program called Around the Kitchen Table. When we first started Peace House, we had brunch every Sunday at our house. And then COVID hit, and we had 30 people crammed into our tiny living room, sitting on each other's laps, eating food, and I thought, this is bad. This is not safe. And so we started delivering brunch. And I was like, but wait, the whole point of brunch was to build community. So instead we started delivering groceries. And I really missed brunch. So as COVID is still here, of course, but as the restrictions got less and as we got tests and, the pandemic lowered, we approached Growing Hope and said, you have a big building. Can we do brunch here? So now we have a monthly brunch called Around the Kitchen Table. About 300 people come every month. It's on the third Sunday of every month from 11 to 1. You are all welcome. It is fancy. Well, as fancy as I get. It is this idea that this bougie brunch should be available to everyone. We have lots of vegan options. We have lots of gluten-free options. Things are homemade. There is pancakes or waffles. We tried crepes once. That was a disaster. It's really hard to cook 300 crepes quickly, let me just tell you. But we always have egg bakes and vegan eggs and vegan sausage. We have vegan cheesy potatoes that have non-vegans begging me for the recipe. Every month there's a theme, and it is the best idea because you don't know if the people you are sitting next to are going home to their tent, their lousy apartment, or their very nice house that they have 3 of. You just don't know. We're all just sitting there passing the syrup, and we have a question.
I just want to know, what was that called again?
The brunch is called Around the Kitchen Table. 3rd Sunday of every month, so next Sunday, 11 to 1 at 16 South Washington in Ypsi. We started another program called the Pullover Prevention. We realized that people's lives were in danger sometimes for something as simple as a traffic stop. My light is out, and now they're running my immigration status. My headlight is out, and we've seen people be killed at traffic stops. So what do? We try to prevent traffic stops. So we gathered together, and my husband changed some lights, and we passed out some granola bars, and our friends helped with the mechanical stuff. And now, 5 years later, 3 years later, again, if I got eaten by a dinosaur tomorrow, pullover prevention would continue. It is always the 2nd Saturday of every month. It rotates around the Ypsilanti area. It is a full-on mutual aid fair. We often have the health department come and do vaccines. We have harm reduction supplies. We have hygiene supplies. We have a free store. Pet Pals has pet food. We fix headlights, taillights, and brake lights. We've had free car seats. We've had free non-perishable food. Everything is free. Always lots of good information. It builds community. Because if we're planting seeds, community, I believe, is the water and the fertilizer that allow those seeds to grow. So those are some of the things that we do. And usually in the winter, all of our energy turns towards the daytime warming shelter, which I know a lot of people in this room know a lot about. So I'm going to pause there and see if people have questions or comments or thoughts about Peace House and the work we're doing there before I talk about the warming center.
What was the name of that prevention program?
Pullover prevention.
If you could wait for the mic, it means that people online will hear your question.
I'm just wondering if some of these things that you're referring to could be listed in a email from our church so that those of us who can't remember, those of us who are getting old and can't remember the details could have access to it.
Thank you very much. By the way, folks, I would remind you that we've banned the word old from these gatherings.
Yes, we use mature now. Do you know of any equivalent programs in Ann Arbor?
So Mercy House, the House of Hospitality I mentioned at the beginning, still exists. It's still in Ann Arbor. It's at 805 West Huron. And they do a brunch every Saturday at the house. Lots of people, not 300, but lots of people. They also have drop-in hours on Monday and Wednesday evening. I don't know the exact times, but I will find out and put it in that email that can be sent to the church. Darcy?
So often we'll have, like if we have memorial services here, we'll have a ton of food left over if the family caters it. And if you've ever tried to drop off food at Delana Center, you can't because it wasn't cooked in a commercial kitchen. And it's, I was telling my friend about this and she's like, why do we make it so hard to feed the hungry? And I said, I don't know, but we do. But you can drop it off at Mercy House. And I've done that with many of our events before. I just show up. I call first and somebody meets me at the door and it's getting used and they'll tell you if they can't use it because they know what they need and they so we've dropped off everything from sleeping bags to platters of whatever it is and so if that happens or if you yourself are hosting a big family event and you've got more food than you can use, call me and we can get it over there. I've made many Mercy House trips.
Thanks. And so in the wintertime, as I mentioned, a lot of our energy goes towards the daytime warming shelter. The daytime warming shelter is celebrating its 12th year. The first year it started was when folks at Mercy House, guests who otherwise would have been homeless, who were sleeping on our couch or on our floor, said, there's no place for us to go in the wintertime during the day. And this is still true to this day. Washtenaw County does not have an emergency shelter. Delana's is not an emergency shelter. It wasn't built as an emergency shelter. I love them. I love what they do. They try really hard to fill in the gaps by opening up winter warming programs that allow people to sleep on the cafeteria floor in the winter months. But that is not an emergency shelter. It's a stopgap measure until we as a county do better. Also, they need their cafeteria during the day. So people had to leave during the day and had no place to go. At that time, Delana's was also a high barrier shelter, which meant if you breathalyzed with alcohol on your breath, or if you urine tested and had drugs in your system, you were not allowed to come. Now, this church did this wine pairing to raise money for the day shelter. And I wish I would have thought to say this that evening. Not one of us who were in that room could have slept at the shelter that night. We would have all been sleeping outside after a church fundraiser. That's what it means to have a high barrier shelter. They're now a low barrier shelter, but they still don't have the capacity to be an emergency shelter. And so the first year, guests at the house approached St. Mary's Student Parish. We were meeting with them about something else and they said, this is the polar vortex. It's really cold. How can we save lives? And we flippantly said, let us hang out in your basement during the day. I'll be honest, I thought they would say no. And then we'd have this leverage with the city. They said yes. And so we were kind of like, well, shit. Now we have to do it. So we organized people from the homeless community, and they staffed a drop-in daytime warming shelter for essentially a month that winter. Every week, begging for another week. At the end of that period, the priest there, at the time it was Father Dan Reed, said, I will advocate that other churches do this too if you hire staff. So we were looking for staff. I was interviewing people when the woman who was the director at the Delana Center at the time said, why don't you take the job? And I thought, I'll take the job for this season while we find other people. And again, God laughed because that seed had been planted. And now every winter, I'm taking a sabbatical this winter. And it's hard, y'all. I want to be there. If you see me here when you're hosting the shelter in February, chase me out. Because it's hard not to be with my friends, my people, my community. But I also know it's healthy. And 12 years later, we're still going. This is the first year I haven't staffed it, and it's because we have a staff of 12 people now. We have a second site in Ypsi. So in Ann Arbor, we rotate from faith community to faith community, and in Ypsi, we have the Ypsilanti Freight House. 4 days a week. And it's an amazing display of community. Food appears. We don't cook it, it appears. Sometimes the hosting faith community cooks, like here, you have an amazing committee that cooks us great meals every day. Other times, I will put a message on Facebook, we have no lunch, help. Suddenly we have lunch for 100 people. It is amazing. It gives me hope every day. It also gives us a chance to be in community with people experiencing homelessness. And I think if there's one thing that I hope people just take to heart today is that homeless is not a noun. Somebody is experiencing homelessness, but that is not their identity. I'm not going to use real names, but, pseudonyms. Jane is experiencing homelessness. She's a mother of 5, including a nonverbal, her son who is nonverbal and has autism. That is a full-time job. Rick is a man who's homeless. He's also an amazing musician and a carpenter. Sarah is somebody who is experiencing homelessness. She is a daughter. She is a sister. She is a teacher who's currently unemployed from that profession. Mike is a gentleman who's experiencing homelessness, who is the most creative man I have ever met. When he was in a tent, we called it the Tajma tent. He had a 3-person tent that he had purchased for himself after doing some gig economy work, painting and doing home repair. In this 3-person tent, he set up a small tent for warmth. That was his bedroom. In one of the other rooms, he had plastic drawers so he could store his stuff. He had draped a tarp out over to create a screened-in porch. And just outside that porch, he had a beautiful fire pit with chairs around it for people to sit in. And then he gathered twigs and leaves and vines and wove them through the larger trees around to create a fence around his compound so that he could know when somebody was coming in and he would be safe. Those are the qualities. Homelessness is not a noun. Pause. Questions, comments? I'll keep talking at you.
Yeah, anyone else before I go on with my slew of questions? Okay. So one thing, this is amazing, great information. One thing I haven't heard that maybe you could talk about is medical care. And then I'll ask other questions.
So medical care is, of course, a challenge. First of all, many people end up using the emergency room as primary care, which is expensive. Whether it's expensive for them or the insurance company or the hospital in the long run, but that's what they have. That's the option they have. I've seen people released from the hospital with amputated limbs, released to the street and told, keep this warm, or keep this dry and clean. How? How do I live in a tent and keep my wound dry and clean in January in Michigan? The other thing I think of when I think of medical care, the other 2 things that pop into my mind are dental care, because there's so few dentists that take Medicaid. There's such a need for medical care. Hope Clinic is great. Shout out to Hope Clinic. But again, the resources aren't enough. And then the other thing I think of when I think of medical care is mental health help. This one is hitting really hard right now. I'm not sure if people have followed what happened in Ipsy with the 30-hour standoff between the police and a man who was having a mental health crisis that ended up with his home being destroyed from holes punched in the wall and fire hoses with water dumped into the house after his heat was turned off and his power was shut off. This was somebody who had an eviction notice. That's not why the police were called. The police were called because he was in a mental health crisis. But he had an eviction notice that really triggered that mental health crisis because he was afraid of being homeless. Because who's not? And there was no mental health care for him. He didn't get the care he needed. We responded with punishment instead of care. So that one feels really tender right now. And I will, not rant about it for the next 40 minutes, but it's hard because we see people all the time who are struggling with their mental health, who, we talk about PTSD and we talk about CPTSD, but that implies post-traumatic stress disorder. There's nothing post when you're living your trauma every day. There's a guy, his name is Ryan Dowd, and he does a lot of trainings, but he used to run a low-barrier shelter, I believe on the south side of Chicago. And he did this study, which I find myself repeating a lot because it just is stunning to me. He said, 3 out of 5 combat veterans have behaviors and thought patterns that are consistent with a diagnosis of PTSD. 3 out of 5 is a large number. And then he talked about homelessness, and he said 5 out of 5 people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, that means homeless for a year or more, or 4 times equaling a year within a 3-year period. 100% of those people have behavior patterns and thought patterns consistent of a diagnosis of PTSD. We know that trauma changes us, and yet we assume that people can just get up and get a job and go about their lives and reconnect with family and their children. Well, they're dealing with this trauma. And so one of the things I always talk about with congregations that are hosting us is come and hang out and be in community with people, and remember the people you're talking to are dealing with serious trauma. And that's our baseline. 1 and 2.
Thank you. A couple of things. I think we've got a real systemic problem in this country related to homelessness, and we have to wrap ourselves around that. I know if you encounter a homeless veteran in this country, there are supports. It's supportive services for veteran families. So I'm directly connected to the VA, and I'll leave my card. If you find homeless veterans, there is a program that is pretty comprehensive, so we have that. My question relates more, I think, to what you had just mentioned, was the trauma associated with many of the homeless we encounter. Is that, do you feel, the biggest factor? Could there be more to the cost of housing? I know our voucher programs through MISHDA are in jeopardy, and so, the inevitable vision would be long-term sustained housing. How do we create that? The temporary services, do we need those and the support that's given to them? But we also have to think about the vision that we have for long-term sustained housing. So, thank you.
Absolutely. We know that housing first is a model that works, so it's really scary that it's so under attack. The one thing I will say about housing first is if you say housing first, that implies there's going to be a second and a third. And too often, we do housing only, and people end up warehoused, and they're away from their community. So we have to be creative. Why can't people share housing if they have a voucher? I've shared housing 99% of my life. I thrive in community. Stick me in an apartment on my own, and I'm not going to be able to keep it. We need to be creative, and we need to remember that there's things beyond housing, but that doesn't mean that housing isn't the first step.
This is maybe a rhetorical question, but say I have a family member who's a hoarder. She's got other mental health issues, 78 years old. They were threatening her with eviction. So they come in, take all her belongings, throw them on the street. Where does she go? How does she find strength to even find a place?
That's such an important point. And I know, we talked about chronic homelessness means that you're homeless for a year or more. Currently, according to at least one of the caseworkers that I spoke with, there is approximately a 9-month waiting list to get a bed at the Delana shelter. So by the time you enter shelter, you're 3 months away from being chronically homeless. And we know that there's no exit strategy for many people as housing programs come more and more under attack. So we have work to do. But I also want to wrap up, and I want to end on a more hopeful note, which is to say, we do not need to wait for other people to do these things. Every single one of us in this room can do something. Peace House has a pantry, an outdoor pantry. It is accessible 24/7. People show up 24/7. I probably fill it 3 times a day. It's next to the pet food pantry, which I could also fill 3 times a day if I had more energy and strength to carry big bags of dog food up and down my basement stairs. Anyone can put a pantry in their front yard. Don't think you want to deal with a full pantry? Stick a cooler out with some cold water in the summer that anyone can pick up. How many people have extra rooms in your home? Could somebody experiencing homelessness stay there for a night, for a week? If it were, it doesn't mean you'd have to invite every stranger you passed on the street corner, but maybe you got to know somebody at the warming center. Maybe you worked with warming center staff or myself to set up boundaries and an exit strategy. Hey, I want to let this person stay with me for a week so that their kid gets healthy, but I don't want to be the one who has to kick them out. So can we make sure they have a hotel to go to after the week, at least for a night or 2? Can always ask people to stay longer. We can all do something. You can contribute to the hotel. You could put people in your living room. You could have a pantry. You could have a cooler. Each of us can do something. And that's sort of why the Catholic worker movement resonates with me, because it's not about waiting for leaders. It's about looking around and saying, what can I do? Oh, I'm going to put out a box with hand warmers and gloves. Oh, we're going to put a little free library in front of the church and fill it with non-perishables. And then we're going to deal with the fact that it's messy every day. And that's okay, because people are eating. We can all do something. And that, I think, is where the hard-nosed hope comes in. That is those mustard seeds. They're everywhere. We are each a mustard seed. So thanks for inviting me.
Sherry, thank you so much for such an inspiring and moving talk, and I think we're all in awe of all of your efforts. We're most grateful for you coming here, and we'll make sure that we have that list of resources available for everyone. Again, thank you so very much.